Today, when you've got companies that are leaders in healthcare or the space industry or the movie industry or the payments industry, and coming into the US market against strong competition and cleaning up, you think, wow, how has that happened?
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to have Greg Shanahan back in the Podcast NZ studio. How are you, Greg?
Good, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, look, always good to catch up. Now, maybe you can fill listeners in on where you fit into this big, wide world of tech in New Zealand.
So I think why I am here is I started a company called Technology Investment Network 25 years ago, really to curate the growth of New Zealand's technology export sector. By exports, I mean companies that sell stuff overseas as opposed to shipping software. And from 2005 onwards, we've been producing a report that quantifies the sector. So this year was our 21st report. So we've been tracking the growth of that sector over that time and have this rich amount of data on what's happening. And in addition to that, I'm the co-founder of a medical device company that's developed an analyzer that uses lasers to verify intravenous drug identity and concentration as the drug's being delivered or prepared to prevent medication error. Trying to copy the Fisher & Paykel healthcare business model in a bigger market.
Fantastic. Well, always good to catch up and hear from you. So today we're going to, really drill into some of the key aspects from the TIN report, as it's called, Technology Industry Analysis 2025. It says on the cover. For folks who are interested in looking this up, and are maybe wanting to follow along, you can actually jump online and order the digital copy kind of, at the drop of a hat, right? So
right now, anytime.
Yeah. So I'll mention that.
Thank you for the plug.
I'm sure there will be, some listeners will be, very keen to do so, or just needed a reminder that they need to buy the current report.
Just one thing there, the easiest thing to remember is TIN100. If they go to Google and just put in TIN100.
Okay. That's good. Now, before we jump in, a big thank you to our show partners, of course, that keep us streaming and through your podcast apps and so on. So thank you to 1NZ, Spark, 2 Degrees, Workday and Gorilla Technology for their support. And also, before we jump into the news side, just a reminder for listeners, or if you're new or haven't caught an episode recently, we're running an online survey at the moment for listeners. Would really appreciate hearing your feedback. And we have a few incentives as well, so we're giving away some prizes. I would really encourage you to jump on. It only takes 60 seconds to 2 minutes to fill in the survey. Gives us a little bit of feedback on how we're doing, gives us a little bit of data, which is helpful for our show partners to know where we fit and who we're talking to. So if you would like some of those giveaways, we've got a Motorola Edge 60 Fusion handset, the Logitech Keys to Go, which is very handy little portable keyboard for your smartphone or what have you, so you can get some work done while you're traveling, and the Logitech Casa pop-up desk, which is also a very cool little gadget for those that are maybe wanting to work on a laptop while you're away, but using an external keyboard and mouse and a bit of a stand that pops your screen up. Very, very slick. Or for those who just, working at times when you're not, plugged into a big sort of docking monitor, this gives you a very nice sort of setup. And also, courtesy of 1NZ, is a 1NZ Warriors jersey. So lots of good stuff in there. If you could jump across to nztechpodcast.com/survey, and you will find that link in the show notes as well.
I was making a note to fill in the survey as you spoke.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's jump in initially with our New Zealand news. Now, it's been coming for a long time, the 3G shutdown. Our mobile networks from time to time need to consolidate And, we know that each of our mobile networks, they've got, varying blocks of spectrum that are available to them. But at the moment, that spectrum is spread out. Some of it's dedicated to 3G, some of it's used for 4G, some of it's used for 5G. And in the case of 1NZ, some of it's also used for 2G at the moment. And so that means that there's less dedicated to the more current standards of 4G and 5G because it's spread. So what we're seeing is the switch off is very much underway. Yeah, just a reminder that is happening. And yeah, 2degrees are underway with theirs right now. For a number of months, there's been an opportunity to text in and to check whether you've got a device that's 3G. Now, for most of our listeners, you're probably not on a 3G device if you're listening to this show, but maybe you've got a family member that's on a device that maybe can't do calling on 4G, so there would be some sort of parallel imported handsets that might be 4G, but actually can't do 4G calling, for instance, or just folks with older handsets. So just worth being aware of. So anyone out there with a iPhone 6, for instance, or earlier, those aren't gonna be working on 4G and 5G. The earlier Samsung Galaxy phones, S7 and earlier, and a bunch of others across the varying brands. So, worth double checking so no one's left kind of high and dry and unable to call 111 and the like. So, So that's underway now for 2degrees and 1NZ. I think they've bumped their dates a little bit. They've actually got it up on their website under 1.nz/3G-shutdown if you're wanting to look. But you can Google this across each network and all the details are there effectively. But starting 20th of January, Dunedin, and then, the varying, basically during January through to March, we will see all the 3G shut down, and 1NZ will be shutting down 2G New Zealand wide for 31st of March. And I think Spark's goal is by end of March that they will have all of their 3G shutdown done. So big changes going on there behind the scenes. But of course, this has already happened to a large degree internationally. So for those that have been travelling, if you were on a 3G phone and you were in Australia recently, you wouldn't have been doing much with your phone at that point. So we're certainly not the first. I think there's been reasonable level of communications on this, but it's happening now. Now, also on a New Zealand front, a new app popped out last week, the gov.nz app, and I fired it up and had a little bit of a look. And I also went to a function that Digital Identity NZ were putting on, and got to chat to a couple of the folks behind the gov.nz app and got to hear a little bit about that. Looks like at the moment what we've got is an app that is something of a placeholder. So there's not a whole lot of stuff embedded in the app, but it's an initial release. And I think that very much came about when Minister Judith Collins met with them earlier on in the year. I think it was April. It sounded like some people's worlds turned upside down a little bit, and their focus on some modernisation and digitisation of government things really turned up quite a notch. And one of those commitments was getting this government app launched this year, and it has been done so. At the moment, most of what I see in there really is kind of varying web content that already exists, but it gives you a bit of a portal. But in the future, there will be things like a digital version of your driver's license you would be able to get through the app, and and varying other things. So yeah, it's a bit of a watch this space to see how they go, and what government entities it makes sense to for I guess the Department of Internal Affairs who are leading and running this project to partner with. You excited about having a government app on your phone, Greg?
I'm very excited. Yes. So I can pay my tax on time and pay my fines and I think it sounds exciting. It's just a natural evolution of the way the world's moving. So no, I have no fears about them having an app with my details on it.
Yeah, we found out, maybe it was last week, around India, where they're pushing a government app or enforcing a government sort of app onto smartphones or new phones have to ship with a government app. I think there's the way to make this sort of work well is an app that focuses on privacy, and I don't think there's anything in the app that's kind of tracking you in varying ways. It's more around providing a service for folks, for citizens, and letting people choose whether they want it or not. I'm not so sure the idea of a mandated app that's installed on every phone and can't be removed would maybe go down so well in New Zealand.
It sounds like it's customer facing rather than the public can access government services. I'm sure the government's got plenty of information on people that is not for public disclosure. So in this case, it would seem that it's making the government more accessible for average taxpayers and citizens.
That's it. So
I guess you'd call it a portal.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, it's very much kind of a bit of a portal. But there will be these sort of digital identity type things and so on that will come through in the future. And some of those aspects will be the subject of much debate,
absolutely.
And that's where we've seen some sort of pushback in other countries around government's approach to digitisation in ways that maybe make people somewhat uncomfortable. And part of the discussion at the digital identity event last week was how we move as a country on things like digital identity. In a manner that's going to really serve people and make people feel comfortable, and part of that is being transparent, giving people the opportunity to use it or not to use it, and always have other options up their sleeve in terms of how they can operate.
So I guess respecting people's right to privacy and confidentiality.
Yeah. A couple of other topics to touch on. Australia have begun enforcing their social media ban for those under 16. There's certainly some debate out there around what apps are included and what aren't, and some pushback on a legal basis as well. So I think Reddit have challenged the legality of this ban, and we've also got some young citizens who are sort of saying, hey, we don't think legally you can put this. I think it's going to be a bit of an experiment, because we haven't seen anything quite like this, certainly done on a national basis within a democratic country before. We certainly know in China, with the Great Firewall of China, there's been a huge amount of control over what content people do and don't have access to over a long period of time. But there's a little bit of a difference between what an authoritarian government or a totalitarian government might do in terms of access to information and technologies compared to what might be tried in a democratic scenario. And then there's all the challenges of blocking content and what works and what doesn't. What are your thoughts on this?
I guess it's a complicated issue. My personal feeling is that social media, and I think it's well substantiated that social media has had a massive negative effect on the mental health of young people. It's a complicated issue, but I think it's good that people are looking to address something that they think might be causal in that, and certainly worth the experiment. for just the consequences of that in terms of negative consequences, declining mental health in young people are colossal.
Yeah.
So I think it's brave of Australia to embark on this course, and they'll hopefully find a medium that works.
Yeah, look, I think this is probably this is the beta test, as it were. This is their way of trying things out. The likes of New Zealand and UK and many others will be watching, pretty closely. And out of this will no doubt be some findings. I think there's a big push locally that we should follow and just go ahead and do something very similar. But I think there's a reasonable amount of debate around that, and I've seen discourse from sort of right across the political spectrum, with folks sort of pushing back and saying this is not a not a good idea. Bloggers like David Farrier sort of just saying that this is a nightmare, and others. So there are, I think, some really strong opinions on what is the right way to tackle technology that can cause harm. In this case, the focus is on social media, but of course there's all sorts of aspects of where technology can cause harm. And speaking of youngsters, yes, social media is a part of that. Some of the gaming platforms are probably just as, if not more, wild than any social media platform in terms of what can go on in the chats and the conversations and so on. And we've got that mix. Say where Twitter's banned, but then not all of the Twitter clones and the new replacements for Twitter have been banned. And then you've got like other harmful content, porn and so on, that there's no, there hasn't been any kind of comment on protecting youngsters from tripping up or stumbling into that sort of content. So there's a fair bit of complexity to this. I don't think it's an easy issue to land on. I think there's an important role for parents when it comes to parenting, right? And part of parenting these days is the technological aspects.
For me, there are two important things. One is, should young people or people generally have access to all that information, and is a positive thing. So whether it be books or movies or whatever, is that appropriate level of information to put in the hands of others? But perhaps the second more important one is the addictive nature of the technology. I mean, I've been going to a local gym, surprisingly, lately. I went into a gym one night and virtually everyone was sitting there, adults and teenagers, looking at their phones, sitting at machines themselves, just occupying space. It was like something from the dawn of the zombie dead. That these people could, trying to do exercises whilst looking at their phone. It was tragic. I thought, wow. So clearly the format is being curated to a point that it's highly addictive, and people aren't making choices; they're developing habits, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, there's some real problems that we have as a society, and I think a number of them are definitely tied up with technology and addiction to gadgets and social media is a part of that picture. Well, we might leave that one because there's probably all sorts of directions we could go. We could spend a long time on it. The prod I get from some folks is that, hey, you put a ban in place like this, what you do need to recognise is if you're going to verify, age, that has to be across the population, because even if folks that are somewhat beyond 16, like yourself and myself, Greg, need to access them, then there's an element where we would have to prove our age as well if we were in Australia.
Paul, I think that you and I are precisely the people that should have less access to that. It's not just a young person problem. Sorry,
maybe some electric shock treatment on our wearable devices or something if you get past your allocation of screen time for the day. Yeah. So these are sort of some of the debates and people's concerns is this type of thing almost I've heard it said, look, Paul, this is a Trojan horse for digital ID so we can be tracked, because the mechanisms that are going to check age and are going to stop people initially are probably all going to fail over time. Now, I'd largely probably actually agree, with that, but if we want to provide something that's going to really, be consistent and is hard to get around, then I'm not quite sure whether the current mechanisms will play out. I'm just not so concerned around, the idea of a big sort of conspiracy to track us all with digital identity in our every move and every website we go to. But hey, I'm no doubt we'll dive further into that in the future, and maybe there is something to be said for these mechanisms. We'll see. Yeah. All right, that's probably the other article actually, which I guess kind of ties into this story that caught my attention, was on a former technology executive who unfortunately murdered his mother, and the family is saying that ChatGPT made her a target, and this was sort of tied in with mental health. So the quote that I got said, basically, this chap, Eric Solberg, if I've pronounced his name correctly, 56-year-old former tech executive who had some mental health struggles, confided in ChatGPT and indicated that he felt that the printer in his mother's home office might be a surveillance device used to spy on him. Now, when he put this to ChatGPT, it actually agreed with the comment, Eric, your instinct is absolutely on point. This is not just a printer, was what ChatGPT sort of, came back with and so on. So anyway, this was kind of, part of a conversation, but we do need to be aware that every technology can be used generally to do good things and not so good things. Yeah. And, we've got these cases, coming through, I guess, increasingly, even though more work is being done to make AI good and safe, there are some flip sides to the story. I was looking at something the other day that was showing toys aimed at kids that have got a AI kind of element to them, where a youngster can interact. And, it's been, quite a number of decades since there were toys, a teddy bear that you can, push a button or something and you'd have a somewhat conversation with it, right? Have a few preset sort of phrases that it would say. Well, now those things are effectively a ChatGPT discussion that are somewhat sort of, shaped with some guardrails. But as you can imagine, this stuff's never perfect. So you end up with kids who are having a chat with their teddy bear or their doll and finding that it veers off in some pretty extreme directions. So yes, we need to keep navigating this, because these issues aren't fully solved yet. All right, so that's probably enough on the general news front. Now I'm very keen to drill into the TIN report, which you've released reasonably recently. You've had your big launch event for it. You've told us there's 25 years since you started the Technology Investment Network, which is absolutely incredible. 21 reports now under your belt. So, you have a pretty good view on what's happening in terms of New Zealand's, tech exports, especially. What are the things that really, stick in your mind as sort of the big, differences and themes for this report compared to previous years?
Well, firstly, I would say that when we published our first report in 2005, I had no clue, that the sector would get that big. I did it because I thought that these were the kind of things that New Zealand should be involved with. So if I go back to TIN, when we started TIN, people would say, I know you're doing this thing with the report and thing, but why are you really doing it? And so it's really to hopefully curate the growth of the tech sector. And so, what I'm saying is I couldn't predict it. So I'm not pretending to be smarter than anybody else. This just happened. Probably two of the key things are just the scale of the sector. So I wouldn't have predicted back in 2005 when the top 100 would have had revenues about $4 billion, that coming fast forward to 2025, that had revenues of $20 billion. I mean, $20 billion is a pretty big number. And if you look at the exports or offshore revenue, so this revenue derived outside of New Zealand, whether or not it's derived digitally or in foreign countries where it's manufactured by New Zealand companies, $15 billion. It's roughly equivalent, slightly below what tourism turned over last year. So once you get to 20 billion, the maths become pretty obvious or simple, that if you're growing at 10% a year for 20 billion, that's $2 billion every year. So I've said, what does that equate to? Well, that equates to another Xero or another Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, who both have revenues around $2 billion. So if you or I came along and said, we've arranged for this company from America to come and set up in New Zealand, they've got $2 billion, people would be gobsmacked. And so going forward, that's happening every year. Wow. And then the rate of change is getting faster. So companies are growing more quickly, they're raising more capital. And perhaps one of the biggest things, they're starting to play the big game. So Sir Paul Shanahan said years ago that, Kiwis specialised at doing the weird stuff, perhaps inferring that was stuff that wasn't really competitive or no one wanted, but we were playing on the fringes. But today, when you've got companies that are leaders in healthcare or the space industry or the movie industry or the payments industry, and but coming into the US market against strong competition and cleaning up, you think, wow, how has that happened? And I think there are probably two things. One, I think we have, by good fortune, superpowers that we've never really acknowledged. And the other thing is that the landscape has changed, so that the resources, technology resources, the difference between the availability of that technology and between, say, a larger economy like the United States or New Zealand has changed. So no longer is it really a major disadvantage in terms of developing tech to be in New Zealand. And so then you've got all of that opportunity without the complexity of a larger society. And then probably finally is that because it's a small society, best practice spreads quickly. So all of a sudden you've got a whole range of companies doing very cool stuff. And so to think about it, some years ago, people said, wouldn't it be great if we had 100 companies doing $100 million in revenue? Well, if you've got 200 companies doing $20 billion, so that's 200 companies with an average revenue of $100 million.
Fantastic.
I mean, it's just a big number. So that is exciting. So I think the things that are making it successful will continue to do so, and it will only become bigger.
Now, there's some complexity to the discussion of looking at how big our tech exports are. When we look at what's our biggest export earner and our second biggest, and so on. And you look at that list, and it's like, well, tech's nowhere to be, found in the official lists. We know that, agriculture, they're at the top, and, beef and lamb and dairy and all the other, things in there. And then, tourism. But then you're looking, well, where's tech? Because tech should be there. Is this because, technology sits in so many buckets and there are so many different sort of sectors where tech fits? Because you look at, say, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. Well, are they a tech company? Are they a healthcare company? Are they a manufacturer?
How do we define it?
And every company should be a tech company to some degree, right?
Yeah. So I guess one of the things when we first started it is that question, so what is a tech company? How do you define that? So we're saying that these are companies in the areas of ICT, high-value manufacturing, or biotechnology, so pharmaceutical companies, etc., that are developing novel intellectual property through some sort of engineering process and then selling that overseas. So those are the kind of three areas. You could include other areas, but when you're starting something from nothing, you've got to come up with a definition that seems fairly tight. Then the other issue is, yes, but are they really exporting? I mean, Data Command shipping code on CDs and boats to there, or Fisher & Paykel Healthcare are making in Tijuana. How can you include that? So what we're really saying is these companies have global revenues and people understand the word exports as opposed to not in New Zealand. So it's a less fancy name. But what we're saying is that in this space, we are creating globally competitive companies. And so sometimes the definition of what's tech or what's an export is a bit confounded, but you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah. So shall we maybe delve into, who was kind of at the top of the list this year? Sios Aerospace were one of the companies that what did you call them this year? Were they Company of the Year?
So they were a thing we call, and they won the Rocket Award. So this is the company that's in the TIN report that increases fastest in the rankings.
Yes.
So last year they weren't in the TIN report because they didn't qualify. This year, out of the 200, they went up 104 places to 96. So they had revenue over $30 million after winning some major contracts in Europe. So all of a sudden, there's something from nothing in Tauranga. And as a result of that, those contracts, or partly because of those contracts, they also got investment in the company. So they're employing now in Tauranga, I think, around about 130 people. So, a windfall for the Bay of Plenty.
Yeah. Oh, it's so exciting to see. So that's one of the companies that we'll be drilling a bit more into over the next month or two. And then, tell us about sort of, the big names, and how do you decide, say, a Kiwi company like Xero is now on the stock exchange in Australia, but of course there's a huge footprint in New Zealand, of course, still HQ here and so on, but, operations in different parts of the world, lots of New Zealand shareholders and founders, like Sir Rod Drury still here. How do you decide?
The cut-off?
Yeah. How do you decide and say Rocket Lab, which, for a while there was known as Rocket Lab USA, who, I think numbers-wise, roughly half of their, staff, give or take, are here in New Zealand, and we see all the time we're hearing about their latest sort of exploits at the moment with different sort of leaks or sharing of bits and pieces of photos of what's coming from them in their new rocket, and of course they've driven incredible growth in the aerospace sector here. How do you decide around?
So it's really comes back to the foundation of the TIN report. So these are companies that were founded in New Zealand, originated in New Zealand, and they still have a significant presence in New Zealand, either headquarters or the majority of their staff, which is why as Rocket Lab grows, it's increasingly focused on the United States market, but its footprint here remains large. If you looked at a company like F&P Healthcare, again, large company, they're now manufacturing in Tijuana. They've got a factory in China. So we've got these companies increasingly becoming global. And so in doing so, they're creating a level of productivity that wouldn't have been accessible any other way. So the key thing is they are founded in New Zealand and they retain a significant presence here. And often, some of the key staff will move overseas because that's where where the market is.
Yeah.
So where a company no longer has a physical presence or any significance, we remove them from the index.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and your key metric really is around revenue, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when we look at the number one on the TIN200 rankings, you've got Xero there now. Over $2 billion in revenue just for the one company, which is just been a phenomenal journey.
So, one of the points we made on social media recently is when Xero was formed in 2006, it took 10 to 20 years for a Kiwi company to $100 million in revenue. In less than 20 years, they're over $2 billion in revenue. So, phenomenal trajectory. And so Xero have shone a light on the pathway to being successful for a whole, cluster of Kiwi tech businesses. They've shown that it is possible.
And Fisher & Paykel Healthcare are in a very, very similar space. I mean, they're only just behind in terms of their reported revenue. They're also, a little bit north of $2 billion as well. Yeah.
So Fisher & Paykel's been around a little bit. Healthcare been around a little bit longer than Xero, but again, a truly global company, and both of them turning over $2 billion or thereabouts. And so both sectors now, the health tech sector and the fintech sector, have revenues of about $3 billion each.
And then also sort of north of a billion, Fisher & Paykel Appliances, which is now owned by Haier, isn't it, out of China, Datacom Group, and then Rocket Lab, who are, I guess, on a pretty quick trajectory, towards hitting $1 billion themselves. I think the numbers in the report were just under 746 million, but of course they're accelerating very, very fast, and I guess their current sort of share prices, indicate that. So for folks that have signed up and jumped online or already have a copy of the TIN report, we're looking at page 23, which is the main kind of rankings. But you've also got broken down into different sort of market sectors and so on. Lots of graphs and sort of visual information, and then lists of companies that are public and private, those that have got backing from private equity and the like, those that are foreign owned, details on mergers and acquisitions. So there's a huge stack of information in there, Greg. What else sort of really stands out for you?
I think so. Just for the listeners, so where does this list come from? So essentially we curate a list of over 1,200 companies, and obviously adding to that every year, and we send surveys to them and then follow up. All the companies who are printed in the report, we send the information to them before we print it, so it's as accurate as possible.
Right, so they get a chance to be able to push back if they think you've got the wrong data and say, actually our revenues are X or Y or what have you.
Absolutely.
And some of them will give you specific data. Others are a little bit more coy. I'm picking, which is the normal route.
Sometimes we display a sign saying that's estimated, but it's the actual, because companies don't want people to know that they've actually provided us with the actual information.
Right. Yeah.
I'd say that where to from here, I guess, in terms of numbers, 500 million's the new 200 million.
Yeah.
That, it used to be, when we started in 2005, really hard for companies like Gallagher's and Tate Electronics and other large privately owned New Zealand businesses to push past 200 million.
Yeah.
But now we've got a whole cluster of companies with revenues over 500 million. So essentially, it's about 20 companies now, or 19 specifically in this report, with revenues over 200 million, and over 40 companies with revenues of over 100 million. So there's increasing capability in the market. Companies are raising money at higher valuations, and Kiwis are starting to put more money into the sector as well. There's just more diversity in the path to market growth.
Yeah.
There's more diversity in the market. So one of the things that we've seen this year, although the US continued to grow strongly, more growth in markets like China and India, because as the companies grow to a scale where they can pick and choose their markets, they're obviously diversifying their risk in terms of the global events, in terms of tariffs in the United States, etc., or any political uncertainty. So they're increasingly able to secure their future because they've got the resources to do that. So that's pretty exciting. The other major factor is increasingly the diversity in the employment in New Zealand, that many of the people working in these companies now are migrants from other companies rather than Kiwis, so we're totally dependent on the talent that we're bringing into the country for the continued growth of the sector.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect. So in terms of growing our own talent internally versus the importance of bringing people in from the rest of the world, how well are we getting that right, do you think?
I think one of the things that Sir Paul Callaghan said was that New Zealand has got to remain a place where talent wants to live. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with having anyone from overseas working in our tech sector. I think if we are able to retain the things that made it, in terms of the cultural things, in terms of business culture, that made it successful in the first place, that's the key, but that's not nationality specific.
What surprised you most that we haven't, maybe haven't touched on yet with the findings this year?
I think so much of what we found was counterintuitive that it just kind of didn't make sense. And so the company that we highlighted this year was in terms of the Mavericks, in terms of a company or an individual, in this case, Windcave, payment solution company, founded by a guy called Andy Cullen, in terms of their contribution to this sector. So they've been a major growth driver of the fintech sector. Windcave grew by 32% last year to $400 million.
Wow.
So when you're growing by $100 million a year, the company started in 1999 as direct payment solutions. So It was just software that facilitated payments. Then they went into hardware, so we're making payments terminals decades after the first FPOS terminals appeared in New Zealand. You wouldn't think that would be a smart move. Then they've moved into the United States, where they're growing strongly across the eastern seaboard of the US. Who would think going to the financial capital of the world and competing against these giants in the payment solutions business would be a path to success? And it's all self-funded. There is one shareholder. They're not raising money. So in terms of the efficient use of capital and a business model that enables growth, they're outstanding. And you can see it when you meet the people. If Joel Martin, the sales director, was trying to sell me something, I would buy it.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the interesting things, is there are aspects of each of these companies that have done well, that if you took one of those aspects out, the result would be very, very different, right? And sometimes it's their ability to sell maybe in a different way to what everybody else is selling. I mean, usually it's a combination, right? It's never going to be just one thing, but that sort of combination of often creativity and innovation, all gets wrapped up, and then there are other pieces. But if you kind of were to pull one out, then it wouldn't achieve the same.
Yeah, I think they're coming back to the people discussion. You and I were talking before this, that people think about tech as a market, but tech is not the unique part of tech. It's the risk that's involved in creating the tech and the sophisticated execution. And so you're reliant on people that are smart enough to execute and resilient enough to continue and are happy with failure or encouraged by failure. In the marketplace, two common things are New Zealand companies that iterate their technology rapidly, getting close to the customer, so really tech-focused, but beside the customer. And then the other thing is the ability the Kiwi character themselves. I've had 2 conversations with US people in the past couple of weeks to say, wow, Kiwis are so honest and so transparent. And companies like Windcave and others are able to quickly and in the longer term build trusting relationships because the do-to-talk ratio is really high, that Kiwis do what they say they're going to do. So I think one of the key parts of our culture is New Zealand needs to remain a high-trust environment where people are transparent and show respect for each other. And that sounds all touchy-feely stuff that's qualitative, but it's a very strong part of our commercial arsenal that people comment on commonly, particularly in the United States.
Yeah, really important that we don't lose those sort of unique aspects of being Kiwis. Yeah, I think there's that ability to as you say, sort of be transparent and interact well with people, whilst backing that up with the ability to execute it at pace becomes a pretty incredible combo.
Yeah, I think almost people are jaundiced, I think. I think if you look around the world, people see that almost the fabric of society fraying. And so if you can choose to deal with someone you trust, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
The other thing that they commonly mention is humility, that no one's chest thumping. Certainly they're getting better at being salespeople, but they're not extravagant in their claims.
Yeah. And what do you notice from a funding perspective? Are there changes that you're sort of noticing from year to year in terms of access to capital or the approaches that our
in terms of our
best companies are doing?
Yeah, I think it's been really tough for the past 24 months and 18 months, 24 months in particular, particularly in the high-risk areas, pre-revenue, early-stage companies. Investment in early-stage companies has continued to grow. Increasingly, what we're seeing is fewer larger deals. And so there's this big opportunity in New Zealand. If you look just across the ditch at Australia, the size of the deals in Australia is significantly higher than in New Zealand, and it's just a small patch of water. So I think there's a real opportunity for the size of our deals to grow and the ability to attract capital. There'll be more diverse sources of funding, so not angel, venture capital, private equity crowdfunding, debt financing, strategic investment, or just growth drawn from their own cash flow, as per companies like Windcave. So there's more sophistication around how to attract funding. There's certainly one of the things in terms of where money is going, is particularly we were talking about this before, into the clean tech and renewables sector, which I think is probably one of the biggest commercial opportunities in history as the world moves from fossil fuels to renewables and stuff that are sustainable in terms of environmental impact. And so it's really in many ways that all markets are open to that change and creating opportunities across the board wherever you are for the incumbents to be displaced by new players.
Yeah, it's a good point. For those that are kind of interested down that track, we have a podcast that does focus on such matters, which is called This Climate Business. So that's one that folks might find interesting. The kind of the crossover between being business savvy and looking at the business opportunities with how we do things that are positive from a planet and renewables perspective as well. So
yeah, and particularly in Australia, they seem to be ahead of the game and attracting money from the bigger end of town than in New Zealand. So there's a lot of scope. If you look at a company like Lodestone that do solar farms, have primarily started in Northland, they've raised about $600 million. And that's probably an old figure, which is just for Lodestone, which is about the same amount of money went into the entire early stage tech investment last year. In Australia, some of the most wealthy Australians like Andrew Forrest from Fortescue Minerals or Michael Cannon-Brooks from Atlassian are huge into this space. The big end of town is really getting on board. It's no longer the domain of people who are trying to signal virtue, or you could never classify it as woke, but it's just a massive opportunity.
Oh, fascinating. Well, it's been great to delve into the TIN report. Before we finish up, a couple of things we will have online at nztechpodcast.com/Christmas, and there'll be a bit of a link there. Just some of the gadgets and tech that I've been looking at lately that you might find interesting if you're looking at Christmas gifts to buy. A couple I'll give a mention to. The new remarkable Paper Pro Move is a little e-paper or e-ink tablet that I've been playing around with. Now, this is interesting because it's a slightly odd size. It's, I guess, bigger than a little a little kind of notebook you'd probably be able to squeeze into a pocket. A little bit taller, but I find it will fit into my trousers, my jean pocket, and I can carry that around. And so instead of when I need to sort of make a note, and I want that to be sort of backed up to the cloud and all that sort of thing, that it's not on a bit of paper that's going to get lost, going to my phone, which is my chief distraction device, being able to go to an e-paper or e-ink type device and scribble notes or draw a little picture and so on is actually really good. And I've dabbled with some of these types of devices in the past. But I'm probably a couple of weeks in with this and finding it's actually pretty handy. So we'll see if I'm still using it in 6 months' time or 12 months' time. But at the moment, I'm really enjoying it.
It's an opportunity for you and I to decrease our phone screen time.
We probably. Most of us probably need to do that. So a plus from that perspective. We had some lights sent over from Signify, who own the Philips Hue and the Whiz lighting brands. And the lights that we got sent, we've got the Whiz floor lamp and the Philips Hue Play wall washer. Basically, they will flood kind of colour onto a wall. Now, it's a lot more dramatic if all your lights are out and it's nighttime. But even in a sort of a lounge environment, in fact, we've got them set up we've got one of them set up the Whiz floor light behind our Christmas tree at the Gorilla Technology office, and it's got the sort of Christmassy colours of red and green, just kind of washing the wall, I suppose, or putting a bit of movement and a bit of colour there. So just interesting to look at what's coming through in terms of the smart lights. Reasonably expensive, some of this kit, but all depends on what you're looking for, and it's certainly cheaper than a renovation to kind of light up and colour a room with some lights as well.
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, something else to look at. But we'll have a few more of these things listed on nztechpodcast.com/Christmas if you want to have a look at that. And just another reminder, we're very appreciative of those who already filled out the survey. But if you haven't done, now's your reminder, nztechpodcast.com/survey, and that link will be in our show notes as well. Would love to get some feedback and hear from you about the New Zealand Tech Podcast. We're sort of planning what the show looks like for 2026, and also some great giveaways there, courtesy of Motorola, Logitech. And we've also got the One NZ Warriors jersey that's been added to the giveaway list. So thank you everyone for listening in. Thank you again to our show partners, Workday, Spark, 2 Degrees, 1NZ, and Gorilla Technology. And thank you, Greg Shanahan, for coming and updating us on the latest from the TIN report.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here.
Catch you next week. And just a reminder, we will have shows coming through the Christmas break as well. There's some really interesting pre-recorded content. And if you're not listening into the New Zealand Business Podcast, be sure to subscribe, because a lot of the top tech company sort of stories we will be delving into on the New Zealand Business Podcast, sometimes in a more in-depth basis than what we'll do on the Tech Podcast. There's a bit of crossover. Some folks and companies will be represented on both with different content. So, well worth making sure you're listening into both. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Merry Christmas. Thank you, Paul.
Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.